Today we're going to be learning Rosh Hashanah Daf Lamed Daled. Today's daf is sponsored by Rochelle Chaypitz in loving memory of her father, Shragai Kohen, Shraga Favo ben Avraham ben Sion Halevi, on the occasion of his 19th yahrzeit. He would be both bemused and proud that his daughter is learning daf. You were terribly missed. And also on the occasion of her maternal grandparents, Rav Moshe Mashbaum, Rav Moshe ben Rabbi Yehuda Lev, whose yahrzeit is on the 4th of Kislev, and Sipora Mashbaum Chayat Sipora Bat of Yaakov Moshe, whose yahrzeit is on the 23rd of Kislev. Okay, one last reminder to register for the Siyum, to get your Zoom link. The Siyum will be on Sunday, and there's a great program. Alana Steinhain is speaking about the quintessential ritual of the shofar. Professor Ayala Libson is speaking about an intro to Ta'anit. And we're going to hear from Meira Shapiro, who is a Shana Aleph student in Migdal Oz, who's been learning the daf for a while already. Okay, we also, if you want to join a siyum in Hebrew around Israel, there are siyumim going on, so you can check the details on the registration form. Okay, starting with the top of our daf Lamed Daled. There's a study guide for today, so you can look, it's on the site. You can find it on the site or in the details of the podcast. We were in the middle of a Braita. We stopped kind of in the middle. What we started to see yesterday is we're starting to learn all sorts of laws of the shofar. Okay, why do we do a tkiya, then a trua, then a tkiya? That's the one we're focusing on right now. First, we want to know, where do we get shofar from, right? It kind of reminds me of the first Mishnah, if you remember, in Shas, which is me'amatayim avrachin et shema ba'aravim. From where do we say shema in the evening? And the Gemara said, where do you even get that there's shema? It doesn't say in the Torah you're supposed to say shema in the morning and the evening. It's kind of, at a certain point, something became so obvious, but sometimes you have to ask, well, where does it even come from? Same thing with shofar. They've been blowing shofar for so many generations, but the fact is it really doesn't say shofar in the Torah. Certain things we just assume. Of course it says it in the Torah, but really it doesn't say shofar anywhere in the Torah. So that we already understood, we get from the Yovel year on Yom Kippur. And that there's only really one option about. But how we blow the shofar, the fact that we put a tkiya, then a trua, then a tkiya, where do we get that from? So we're going to see that there's really two approaches. The first approach was what we saw, which is that there's this pshuta lefanea, pshuta lachareh, from the words in the verse, havarta shofar, and then it said at the end, ta'aviru shofar. So it says havarta shofar truah. So havarta is the first tkiya, then the shofar, then the trua, and then at the end it says havarta, again there's a trua. Now we want to say minayim l'shalosh shel shalosh shalosh. We're on the third line of today's daf. How do you know 3 sets of 3 though? That would teach you basically a trua, a tkiya, and a trua. Why do we do it 3 times? So now we say, Talmud Lomar, we're going to learn it from the pasuk there also. Avarta shofar trua, Shabbaton zichron trua, and Yom trua yelachem. There's 3 places where it says it in the Torah, this idea of trua. There's Havarta shofar trua, that was by the Yovel. There's Yom trua yelachem, and there's Shabbaton zichron trua. There's 3 times where trua is mentioned. From there, we learned that you have to do the trua 3 times. If you have to do the trua 3 times and you need tkiya before each one, that's going to get you up to 9. Okay, eventually we're going to get to why do we do 30, and then really why do we do 100? Because really what the halacha says is that you really have to do 30 kolot, and then in addition we add all sorts of other ones. Hopefully we'll have time to discuss all of that later. So now we have 3 different verses that mention this trua relating to Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah. They're not all. One of them is Yom Kippur, but we already said, and that's what we're going to say right now, minayin litena ta'amor shel zeh b'zeh v'shel zeh b'zeh. Theoretically, what you're really saying is 1 for Yom Kippur and 2 for Rosh Hashanah. How do we know that we view this all as one whole unit? That's because we have a gzera shava, Talmud Lomar, shvi'i l'gzera shava. That means it says Chodesh HaShvi'i there, and it says Chodesh HaShvi'i by Yovel, right? And by Rosh Hashanah, we're going to learn from one to the other. Now you have to realize before we move on that we already learned something with this Shvi'i, but we learned it a little bit differently. What we learned at the end of yesterday's daf was that since we learn for Yovel, whatever's true for Yovel, we're going to learn for Rosh Hashanah as well, but they learned it not from a Gzeira Shava. Gzeira Shava is when you have 2 words in the same verse, right? In different verses that are the same word, we can learn from one to the other. That's what they did right now. In the beginning of this Braita, they did what's called a Hekesh, which is comparing 2 things, not because the same word appears, but it says Shvi'i by Yovel. And we said you really didn't need that word because you would have known it was the 7th month because it's on Yom Kippur and everyone knows Yom Kippur is the 7th month. So why did it say the 7th month? To teach you that everything that goes on in the 7th month with shofar is all the same, meaning Rosh Hashanah. Okay, and that's how we got to it. And that's called a hekesh. So later the Gemara is going to say, why did the same Braita first employ a hekesh and then employ a gzera shava when really they could have just used one of them? It seems strange that they switched from using a hekesh to a gzera shava. So we'll get to that in a moment. Right now we're still in the Braita. So haketzad, how do we do it? Shalosh shehem tesha. You do 3 sets, which end up 9 blasts because you have tkiya, trua, tkiya, tkiya, trua, tkiya, tkiya, trua, tkiya. That's 9 blasts. Shiur tkiya kitrua. This is similar to what we saw yesterday, although a little bit different. Remember, we saw shiur tkiya is either 3 truot, or maybe it's 1 trua, and maybe it depends on how you understand the use of trua in each one. The tkiya is as long as the trua, and shiur trua kishlosha shvarim. Here it tells you the length of a trua is like 3 long moans, right, or size. So we have the shvarim, 3 of them. That's the same size as a trua, and that's the length, and that's the same length as the tkiya. So now the Gemara is going to ask the question I told you already they were going to ask. Hi, Tana, that Tana here, me'ikara ma'itela behekesha. First it started with a hekesh, then it moved to use gzera shava. It seems strange. So they say hachikam. What he really meant to say was the following. If there wasn't a gzera shava, I could prove it with a hekesh. But but now that I found gzera shava, I don't really need the hekesh anymore because gzera shava is pretty strong. Why would he suggest that if you didn't have gzera shava? Because if you remember, we've learned this many times. A gzera shava you can't make up on your own. It's only something you have a tradition about. A hekesh you can make up on your own. You can see something and say, "Oh, look, there's a hekesh in the pasuk," or kavachomer, for example. You could say, "Oh, here's a kavachomer." That is something you could do on your own, but you can't on your own do a gzera shava. So therefore, what he wanted to say is, if you didn't have the gzera shava, you could use a hekesh. But anyway, I have a gzera shava, and then I don't really need the hekesh. Now, Tana. So that was the first approach, to learn it all from the Yom Kippur of the Yovel year. But now they say, Hi Tana, my Tana gzera shava mimidbar. Someone else, a different Tana, learned all these laws, although not all of them, obviously not the shofar law, because we're going to learn it now from the trumpets, the chatzotzrot, that they sounded in the midbar. When it was time to travel, they would sound chatzotzrot. When there was an enemy coming upon them, they would sound chatzotzrot. When they wanted to gather the people, they would sound chatzotzrot, trumpets. So there's a whole section that talks about the trumpets in Sefer Bamidbar. And therefore, they say, we're going to learn it from there. Now, obviously not how we know you use a shofar, because that for sure you're going to have to learn from Yovel. But the other things we're going to learn from there, like a tkiya before and a tkiya after. Utikatem tru'ah. So what do we learn from the words utikatem tru'ah that appears in Bamidbar there? You should be tokea a tru'ah. So what do they say? Tkiya b'fnei atzma utru'ah b'fnei atzma. This teaches you there's something called the tkiya and there's something called the tru'ah, and they're separate sounds. So now the Gemara says, not necessarily from those words. You think those are 2 separate sounds. But maybe it's right? Utkatem trua, literally the verb means, and you should blow a trua, which sounds like it could all be one, because tkiya is used, the verb of tkiya goes with the noun of trua. So it sounds like they really could be one. So why do you say they're 2? So they say, well, kishehu omer, later there in the verses in Bamidbar, it says, ubehakil et hakahal, when you gather the nation together, there's a whole list. When you do this, you do that. When you do this, you do that, and you blow them each a little bit differently each time. And that way, right, people know. It's almost like a Morse code, right? If you hear a certain blast this way, you know that we're about to go to war. If you hear a certain blast this way, you know that we need to just get together. And if you hear, right, it's all different sounds. So now they say, ubehakil et hakahal titkeu velo tariu. Here you see 2 verbs. One is titkeu, below a tkiya blast, and one is tariu, right? It says, do the tkiya blast, don't do the trua blast. That makes it obvious that there's tkiya separate and there's a trua separate. So from there we learned tkiya b'fnei atzma utrua b'fnei atzma. Now we want to get to what we were really trying to get to here, which is uminayin shepshuta lefaneha. How do you know that the tkiya comes before every trua? Talmud Lomar, utika'atem tru'ah. There in the verses in Bamidbar, it says, you write, this is where we started. Utika'atem tru'ah. Notice the order, just like we have va'avarta shofar tru'ah. First va'avarta, that showed the tkiya comes before. Here, the verb utika'atem comes before tru'ah. That means tkiya comes before tru'ah. Minayin shepshuta lachareha. How do you know you need a tkiya at the end then? Talmud Lomar, in a different verse there, in the same section, tru'ah yitka'u. It says tru'ah, and then it says yitka'u. The verb is after the tru'ah. So there you see, you need a tkiya at the end. So that's answer number one. Rabbi Yishmael ben Asher Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer eno tzarich. You don't need. Now it's unclear, is he referring only to the last one, or is he referring to both? Okay, both the tkiya at the end and before, or maybe just the tkiya at the end. You'll see why. Harei Omer, you don't need that verse you just said. Why not? Because it says uteka'atem tru'ah shenit. It says you should blow the tru'ah a second time. This is after you blow it the first time for one of the instances. It says that you should blow it a second time. Now, if you already blew it and then it says that you should blow it, you don't need to say a second time. It's obvious it's a second time because you just said you do this and then you do that. It's quite clear it's a second time. Shein Talmud Lomar shenit. You don't need that word. Uma Talmud Lomar shenit. So why does it say that? Ze bana av shekol makom shenemar tru'ah tehei tkiya shni hala. Every time you have a tru'ah, the tkiya should be secondary to it. Now, shni hala could mean the tkiya is supposed to come after it. And then that means he only disagrees with the second pasuk proving it. The first one, he agrees with the Tanakama. Alternatively, you could say secondary means secondary meaning less important, which means that the tru'ah is going to be in the center, surrounded by two tkiyot. So you could explain that what he actually means is both. He's learning both from there. Okay. Now, the big question is, right? It's only in the midbar. How do we know that we can learn from the midbar and the chatzot in the midbar to the shofar on Rosh Hashanah? But Rosh Hashanah minayin, where do we get that from? Talmud Lomar, tru'ah l'gzeira shava. Again, we're going to use gzeira shava, which is, it says tru'ah in the chatzot in the trumpet section, and it says tru'ah obviously by Rosh Hashanah, Yom tru'ah, Zechon tru'ah. So we're going to make a gzeira shava, and what's true for one is true for the other. So we're going to learn from the chatzot to the shofar. Continuing on in this braita, shalosh truot ne'emru b'Rosh Hashanah. There's 3 truot mentioned. This is exactly what we saw in the braita before, although there's going to be a big difference. Okay, but right now it sounds exactly the same. Shabbaton zichron tru'ah, Yom tru'ah, v'avarta shofar tru'ah. Different order, but it basically quotes the same 3 verses, which are going to teach us that you need 3 tru'ot. And once you have 3 tru'ot, you need a tkiya before and a tkiya after, which is going to get you to 3 sets, altogether 9 blasts. So now they say, Matzinu lemidim, shalosh tru'ot v'shesh tkiyot ne'emru b'Rosh Hashanah. So now we get it that there's 3 tru'ot, and 6 tkiyot, and that's what you have to do on Rosh Hashanah. But here he adds an important line, which differs from the braita we saw in the beginning of the page. Shtayim midivrei Torah ve'echad midivrei sofrim. Above, we said that all 3 are psukim from the Torah, and therefore they're all 3 by Torah law. And that's actually how we hold. That the bare minimum that you need to do are 9 kolot from the Torah. Everything else is rabbinic, but we're going to see those 9 are going to become 30, and we'll get to that soon. But right now it's 9 on a Torah level. According to this opinion, only 6 are on a Torah level. 2 tru'ot, 4 tkiyot, the rest are rabbinic. How does he get that? Even though he quoted it from 3 verses. Now, you might remember many times we connect things to verses, but they're only rabbinic in nature. It's just connecting it to a verse, but really that verse is needed for something else. And therefore, you can't learn from it a doraita law, a Torah law, but only a rabbinic law. And that's what we're going to say here. Shabbaton zichron tru'ah v'avarta shofar midivrei Torah. Okay, those 2 are Torah law. Yom tru'ah yelachem. Now remember, what braita are we in? We're in the braita that's talking about, we learn the laws of shofar from Bamidbar, from the trumpets. If that's the case, you need the word tru'ah and that pasuk for the gzeira shava. And if it's not free for the gzeira shava, if you remember, we had a whole thing about if something, when we learned about gzeira shavas a long time ago, if you have a gzeira shava and the word isn't free, it's called afnuye. If it's not panui, if it's not free available, then you can knock out the gzeira shava. So we want to say this pasuk is free. It's not needed for anything else. Really, on a Torah level, it's teaching you that gzeira shava. And we learn it. We use the word tru'ah there to learn that we learn all the laws from the Chatzotzrot in the desert. And therefore, Yom Teruah Yelachem L'Talmudohu Ba. It comes for its own drasha, and therefore it's only rabbinic, the obligation for the last set. We're now going to see a third opinion about this. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonatan, Echad midivrei Torah, Ushtayim midivrei Sofrim. Only one is Torah level, meaning you really only need 3 blasts. A Trua with its Tkiyah before, its Tkiyah after, which, by the way, probably makes the most sense. That really, you're supposed to hear 1 blast. 1 blast ends up with 3 because you need its Tkiyah before, its Tkiyah after, and finished. So he says you really only need 1 midivrei Torah. The other 2 are midivrei Sofrim. So now he's going to have to explain why. That's the one that's clearly d'oraita, even though what's interesting is it's about the Yovel year. But again, once we have the Gzera Shava between Yovel year and here, we can learn that. And Shabbaton Zichron Truah v'Yom Truah Yelechem L'Talmudohu Ba. Both of those have something else we learn from them, and therefore we can't learn that blowing the Truah on Rosh Hashanah is a Torah level obligation from those verses. My L'Talmudohu Ba. So what is the drasha that comes from those psukim? And that's one we know. One is going to be the Gzera Shava of Truah. Okay, but the second one, well, he's now going to take Yom Teruah Yelachem, which the last guy said was a Gzera Shava. He's not going to learn the Gzera Shava from there. The Gzera Shava is going to be from Shabbaton Zichron Truah. That Truah is used to compare to the Midbar, to the trumpets. Yom Teruah Yelachem is Mebayli B'Yom V'Lo B'Layla, to teach you that shofar blowing has to be during the day and not at night. This, by the way, is similar to what does it make you think about? Which we've made a number of comparisons already to the temple. That shofar is getting a level like in the temple. In the temple, everything was during the day. Nothing was done at night. This might be another proof. Right? We just saw one yesterday about not using urine to wash it out, mipnei kavod, which is usually a term used with the temple. It's not respectful in the temple to use urine for anything. So here also, we're going to have another comparison to the fact that it has this level like a temple, like temple worship, right? We saw it before also we saw it in some other sugya. Okay, so now they say, v'idach, so if he's going to say Yom Teruah is for this Deoraita law and therefore not free to teach that on a Torah level you're obligated in shofar, so what did the other opinions do? Where did they learn Bayom V'Lo B'Layla? We saw 2 other opinions. One that said it's used for the Gzera Shava, but not for Bayom V'Lo B'Layla. And the other one said all 3 are on a Torah level. There, and then you wouldn't be able to learn B'Yom V'Lo B'Layla. So Nafkalemi B'Yom Kippurim. Very easily they learn it from B'Yom Kippurim. There it says Yom. What's true for Yom Kippur is true for, right? Remember, talking about Yom Kippur in the Jubilee year. When you blow the shofar, must be during the day and not at night, because it says V'avartem Shofar Truah B'Yom Kippurim. We always say Yom Kippur, you think of the whole day of Yom Kippur, including the night. But they say, no. It says B'Yom. B'Yom means during the day. So now they have a great question, which is, wait a minute. We were in this Braita, which was all, we're not learning laws of shofar from Yom Kippur. We're learning them all from the trumpets. So now that you're saying we can learn something from Yom Kippur, this law of daytime, and by the way, the 3, right, the shofar blast is d'oraita was also learned from Yom Kippur. So if that's the case, he says, if you're already learning things from Yom Kippur, why don't you hold like that other Braita that learned all the laws of shofar, the Tkiyah before, the Tkiyah after? Why don't you learn that from the Yom Kippur psukim? So the answer, he doesn't think that those words can be used to teach you the Tkiyah before and the Tkiyah after. Why not? So what does he do with those words? Now, we actually learned this halacha already. He uses v'ha'avarta for the law that Rabbanit said. You have to blow the shofar in the way it was on the animal, which means, if you remember, you can't heat it up and widen the narrow part of the shofar and narrow the wider part of the shofar and blow the opposite way. Can't do that. You have to use it the way it was on the animal. So therefore, we're now going to say that's what Havarta comes to teach you. Ta'aviru deka'amar rachmana ne'abre b'yad. If you wanted to learn it from the word ta'aviru shofar b'chol artzachem, and is that what it is? Ta'aviru shofar b'chol artzachem. You want to say that's teaching about the tkiyah after? He says, no. You would have thought if you're going to learn it from that and say that, you might think, what's the mitzvah? Not to blow the shofar, but what is the word ta'aviru? pass it around. Sounds like maybe you're supposed to walk around from place to place, holding a shofar in your hand and kind of like a mascot. You have this symbol and you walk around carrying the shofar from place to place. So we don't want to learn the laws from there because it doesn't really sound like you actually have to blow the shofar. It's a bit of a strange thing to think about, but on the other hand, maybe there's something to it, right? We do other mitzvot with carrying. We carry a lulav and an etrog, so maybe you'd carry a shofar. Again, you have to remove what you are so used to, that of course a shofar is for blowing, but maybe not. So therefore, he doesn't want to learn the laws from there, and that's why this Tana chose to learn them from the chatzotzrot, from the trumpets. Even though there's obviously, I might even just suggest there's difficulty with both methods of deriving it. Number one, it would be weird that we're going to learn laws of Rosh Hashanah, which come up every year, from laws of Yom Kippur in the Jubilee year, which comes up once every 50 years, which is such a rare occurrence. And yet we're going to learn all the basic laws from there. That's number one. To learn it from the Chatzotzrot, the obvious problem is those are trumpets and not a shofar. So it's a little bit strange as well. So now the Gemara is going to say, well, what's the response to, we just said the Tana from before who learned it from, the Tana from here who learned it from the trumpets didn't want to learn it from the Jubilee year psukim because of these issues. Bavarta, you want it for Rav Matna. And and then ta'aviru just sounds like you pass it around, and that's why he didn't learn it. So idach, what's the other opinion going to do with this? De Rav Matna mishane b'diburhe, because it uses the word v'ha'avarta, and it didn't say to blow, we can learn two things from it. In other words, the usage of the word teaches us, because it used a different word, you can actually learn two things from it. Ta'aviru biyad lo matzi damar tegamar avara varami Moshe. Ta'aviru, you wouldn't. Ta'aviru bayad. We have precedent for the fact that lahavir has sound associated with it. Even though you might say lahavir normally is just passing something, I'll show you a proof, and therefore I wouldn't have thought that ta'aviru shofar means carry it. Why not? We can learn from Moshe. It says by Moshe, v'yitzav Moshe v'yaviru kol b'machaneh. He commanded them to make a sound in the machaneh, la'avir kol. La'avir kol is, here you see, the verb aval with sound. So therefore it's obvious, v'avar shofar, and that's why the person who derived it all from there really derived it from there. Okay, so now we've gotten all that down pat. So mala halam b'kol af kam b'kol. Just like that's with sound, this is also with sound. Ulahai tana demai telami midbar. And for the Tana who learns it from the midbar, now we're back to that. That's a basic question I asked before. If this is chatzotzrot, then maybe you would learn that on Rosh Hashanah, you're going to learn almost all the laws from there, other than that one about it being during the day. But everything else, and one that it's still right to, another time, another set. But otherwise, you should really learn that it's a chatzotzra. Talmud Lamal. Now we're going to learn it from another verse, but not a Torah verse, from Tehillim. Remember, we keep going back to this pasuk. And the truth is, I even think it goes back to the beginning of the Masechet. It's trying to remind us. It often happens at the end. We're reminded of things from the beginning. It's a reference to all the Kiddush HaChodesh. If you forgot, that was what the whole beginning of the Masechet was about, right? Now we're so into shofar. But which means blow in the Chodesh shofar when the moon is covered, right? When is the moon covered? The only holiday is Ezu Chag Shachodesh Mitkasebo, Hevei Omer Ze Rosh Hashanah, V'Ka'amar Rachman HaShofar. So there it seems clear. The Torah says, even though it's not the Torah, Rahman is usually the Torah, but here it's actually not the Torah, but the Tehillim. From there we learn that it's shofar. Okay. Now we get to Itkin Rabbi Aval Bekesri. Okay, we finally get to what we do today. So we're going to get there a little bit slowly, but we're going to get there. Itkin Rabbi Aval Bekesri. He made a takana in Caesarea. It seems it's Caesarea. This is Rabbi Aval. He's a student of Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, so he institutes the following. Tki'ah, Shlosha Shvarim, Tru'ah, Tki'ah. This is what we call Tashrat. Okay, where we say, this is one of the first blow that we do in the shofar blast is Tkiya, Shvarim, Trua, Tkiya. Until now, we've just been talking about Tkiya, Trua, Tkiya, or possibly Tkiya, Shvarim, Tkiya. That was the whole debate yesterday. So now he said, let's do Tkiya, Shvarim, Trua, Tkiya. Why? Manavshak, because either way you look at it, you'll basically resolve all your issues. If it's a whale, then you've done tkiya. If it's a long moan, 3 long moans, then you've done your tkiya, 3 shvarim, and your tkiya, and you're good. Basically, this is the best solution to be yotze, to be fulfilling all the different approaches. To which the Gemara says, not really, though. And then just one second, and therefore they were just commenting, right? He was obviously not sure which way to hold on this debate, so let's just do both. But matkifla ravavira, Dilma Yilule Have, maybe it is a whale, in which case, exactly what I see you're asking in the chat, you have a break now. You need to do trua tkiya. You can't do tkiya shvarim trua tkiya. Now you have a break in between the tkiya and the trua. That's a problem. So what does he answer? Jahadar avid tkiya trua tkiya. Oh, what I meant is, well, then afterwards you do tkiya trua tkiya. In other words, do tkiya shvarim trua tkiya, and then do tkiya trua tkiya. Obviously, we're still going to have another problem, which is matkifla ravina, but maybe it's a moan. But then you're going to have a break between the trua and the tkiya. So that's a problem. So I see you're asking all the questions in the chat that the Gemara is going to get to. So hold off. So he says, oh no, what I meant is, right, do tkiya shvarim trua tkiya, then do tkiya trua tkiya, then do tkiya shvarim tkiya. Now you already get why we do what we do today, but we're still going to have a question with this. So that's how that way, if it's really shvarim, then you won't have a break. So then the obvious question becomes, Ella Rabbi Yavau Ma'itkin, but then I don't get what he instituted. If it's a shvarim, then you did the shvarim. If it's a trua, you did the trua. So why do you need to do tkiya shvarim trua tkiya? What does that do for you? So now they say the following. What he really wasn't sure about was Dilma ganach v'yalil. Maybe the sound is both a moan and a wail. Maybe that's what you need. It's a combo. So then the obvious question, you might not have thought of this, but right. So basically now we have shvarim trua, and shvarim. And with that, we cover all our bases except for one. What didn't we cover? You should do trua shvarim. Why do we do shvarim trua and not trua shvarim? If we're worried that it's a cry, that the cry is somehow a different sound and it's a combo of those two sounds, maybe it's a combo, but starting with the short wail and going to the long moans. So why don't you do that way? So the answer is when somebody cries, right? Think about a baby crying, first they kind of hold their breath and it's like this, and then, right? So it's this long sound and then it gets to the short sounds. People don't go, and then, right? Not usually. Maybe one can make an argument. But so therefore, that's why we do it in that way. Okay. This is fascinating because now we understand why we do it the way we do it. Before we get to the continuation, even though I could theoretically say this later, but I'll say it now already. First of all, Rabbi Shiur Gaon asks a great question. He says, I don't understand. What happened before Rabbi Avau's times? If we've been doing shofar for all these generations, what, they didn't know how they did it? And they were doing it wrong all along? It seems very strange. So he understands, which not everybody does, but it's an interesting approach. He says, this isn't halacha. It's not like we're not sure. Is this the way to do it? Or is this the sound, right? It's not like there's a set sound that was clear from the Torah what has to be done. And we're just trying to fulfill all options and therefore do them all this way. Really, it just needs to be some sort of wail, cry, sound, something. It doesn't really matter. You're going to be yotze if you did it one way. But because there's different possibilities, and if you think about it, I don't know for you, but when I hear shofar, sometimes it makes you think about different things. And one sound makes you think of one thing, and a different sound makes you think of something else. And what he was basically saying was adding different possibilities, not that it's halachic. And if you don't do this, you're not going to be yotze or mitzvah of shofar. It was just, he was allowing for different sounds and different possibilities, the main thing he's basically saying is it wasn't a halachic thing. Okay, it's not like you have to hear each one for halachic reasons. Other people obviously view this as very halachic. And then there's interesting debates about just if we talk about where do you add the shofar, okay, right now we're up to 30 basically, because we got to 9 of Tekiah, Trua Tekiah. We have 9 of Tekiah, Shvarim Tekiah, because again, if you hold, and especially if you view it not like Rosh Shiur going, but yes, it's halachic, so you need 3 sets of everything. And then you're going to need 3 sets of Tekiah, Shvarim, Trua Tekiah. And those are 4 sounds because the Shvarim, Trua sound counts as 2 different sounds. So then you end up with altogether 30 kolot. We do 30 kolot right before the Amidah. We do 30 kolot in the Amidah. Where does that come from? So we also saw it already in the Gemara earlier. They talked about the Tekiyot Me'umad and the Tekiyot Me'yushav, if you remember. There's different opinions about whether you do it during the Amidah, during the silent Shemona Esrei, or only when the Chazan goes over the Shemona Esrei. There's a debate about that. There's interesting debates. What we do is, at least in my custom, I don't know about everyone here, but when you do it with the brachot of Malchut, Zichronot, and Shofarot, you do the one set of each, right? Tekiah, Shvarim, Trua, Tekiah, Tekiah, Trua, I think it's Shvarim first, and then Tekiah, Trua, Tekiah. Okay, that's a set of basically your 10 kolot. So then you end up with 30 with the 3 blessings. But not everybody agreed. Some people thought you just do Tekiah, Shvarim, Tekiah for one, Tekiah, Trua, Tekiah for another, Tekiah, Shvarim, Trua, Tekiah for another. And that's a whole different approach. So you don't need each one for each blessing, but maybe you just need all together to get to all of them. There are all different approaches here, many, many different opinions. Anyway, we're going to stop for right now because there's so much more to be said, but we're going to go on. So now the Mishnah had said, we're going back to the Mishnah. We'll get to the 100 after. Fine, maybe I'll get to the 100 now. So the 100, why do we do 100? Some people say it's just in case you didn't hear them right. So we're going to add some after the Shemona Esrei. And after we're all done with everything, let's just add more in case that. It could be also maybe because people came late to shul, so we added them. Maybe that's another reason. But another reason that's given by the tradition is that, if you remember, we mentioned Sisra's mother. She cried out, she wailed. And they say, the Medrash says she wailed 100 times that night. And some people say we want to do it, Keneged her wails, we do 100 kolot. So maybe that's why. There's different opinions as to why exactly we do it. Okay, but that's clearly rabbinic. That way, if for some reason you didn't make it to shul and someone blows the shofar for you, you only do the 30, you don't do all the 100. Okay. Moving on, I'm sure there's other reasons. I see someone quoting something that I don't remember seeing about Sari Menu and the Al-Qaeda. I'm sure there's other reasons given, but those are the main ones. So now we had this thing, if you start blowing your tekiah and you blow it super long, a double tekiah, it still only counts as 1. Okay, that's not really what they're referring to now. Now they're going to talk about something else. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Shamat Tesha Tekiah, Tesha Sha'ot Hayom. We're going to get into all sorts of other laws of tekiah shofar. If you blasted, you heard 9 blasts, but throughout the day, okay, 1 an hour. So, yatsa, no problem. You can do that. Tanya Namihachi, Brighta to support this halacha of Rabbi Yochanan, Shamat Tesha Tekiah B'Tesha Sha'ot B'Yom Yatsa. Now the Brighta is going to continue. Mitish'a b'nei Adam ke'echad lo yatsa. But if you heard from 9 people, it doesn't work. The assumption at once, okay, this means if 9 people, they all line up and each one blows one of the blasts that you're supposed to hear, that doesn't work. First of all, we learned trei kale lo mishtame, you can't hear 2 things at once, but then we actually said that you could hear them all at once because the mitzvah is chaviv alecha, right? Or chaviv aleich. You really want to keep the mitzvah. So, and it's once every whatever, you can make an effort and hear, but that's different because then that's when you're trying to hear one thing. Here, you want to hear all the kolot. You can't possibly hear all 9 at the same time. There's actually it's a little more complicated. Rashi doesn't like this. Girsi has different girsi, understands this differently. I'm going to leave that aside right now, but there are a bunch of different ways of understanding this line. If one person blows the tekiah and a different person blows the trua after the tekiah was blown, that's fine. You don't have to hear it all from one shofar blower. Even with breaks, right? Splits between them and even all day long. By the way, what's interesting, we talk about that they're mentioning things from earlier in the Masechet. Remember the word serugim? They didn't know what it meant. So they asked the Amma, the maidservant of Rebbe, and then she said to the rabbis, why are you all leaving? Why are you all coming in to serugin, one after the other, not in a row? So it's funny now they're using it as if everybody knows what it means. Umi amar Rabbi Yochanan hachi. So that's the end of the bright. And now they want to question Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said you can hear 9 tkiyot, 9 hours of the day, no problem. In other words, 1 an hour without a problem, right? It doesn't really talk about hefsek here, which is a little bit strange. Anyway, they say, how could Rabbi Yochanan have said this? He said in a different occasion, in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehotzadak, when it comes to saying Hallel, or when it comes to reading the Megillah, let's say you stop in the middle, let's say you have to go to the bathroom or something, or for whatever reason you stop in the middle and you come back. If you've left the amount of time it would take to say the whole thing or to finish the whole thing, then you have to, it sounds like actually just to finish it, from wherever you're up to, let's say it would have taken 5 minutes for you to finish it, and you get back in 4 minutes, so you can continue where you were up to. If you got back after 5 minutes, you'd have to go back to the beginning. So that sounds like it's a unit. You'd have to do it all within a certain time frame. So how could he possibly say you could blow the shofar in 9 hours of the day, 1 an hour? So they say, that's not a problem. Very easily answered. Lo kasha, hadide, hadirabe. In our case, he was giving his own opinion. In that case, he was quoting his rabbi. It says, Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yehotzadak. So it wasn't that he held that way. He was just quoting it in the name of his rabbi. But we're not really satisfied with that answer. B'dide lo, what, he doesn't really hold that way? What his rabbi said he does. Because look, there was a story. How Rabbi Avau, remember I told you he was his student. So here's a story with him and his rabbi. Rabbi Avau, right, he was the student of Rabbi Yochanan. He was walking on the street right behind Rabbi Yochanan. He was saying Kriyat Shema. He got to these the dirty alleyways. Ishtik, he stopped davening because it wasn't appropriate when you're walking through this dirty alley to be saying Shema. After he passes the alley, Amarle says to Rabbi Yochanan, Ma'u ligmor, can I finish now? Or do I have to go back to the beginning? If you waited long enough to finish the whole, the time it would have taken you to finish the whole thing, and you're beyond that time, then go back to the beginning. So now what do you see? Clearly, Rabbi Yochanan thinks you have to go back to the beginning, and you have to do it all within a certain time frame. So how could he have said that by shofar? So hachi ka'amrle. So first of all, I see you're asking, don't you have to say Shema sitting down? You don't. So it said if you remember in Bracha, you could say Belechtecha baderech while you're walking, while you're this, okay? And actually, we're going to see right now that Rabbi Yochanan disagreed with him. And there's a debate about what Rabbi Yochanan disagreed about, whether he disagreed that he even needed to stop. That theoretically, according to some, you could just hold your nose and keep walking and keep saying Shema. That's a possibility, okay? So now we're going to see. He said, Hachi Kamerli. This is how you should understand Rabbi Yochanan. L'didi lo sfirali. I don't hold like you do. And there's a debate. I don't hold like what? I don't hold that you needed to stop, like I just said a second ago. And therefore, right, and I also don't hold that you need to wait, okay, that you need to worry about the time frame. In other words, theoretically, you could say it also later in the day. It doesn't, you could split it up, like he said about shofar. But l'didach desviralach, but according to you who thinks, now again, it's not clear what it is. Does he just disagree with him about the waiting issue? Or does he also disagree even with the fact that he stopped? The fact that he stopped, that's an irrelevant point really for our sugya. So some people hold that way, but some people say, no. He really just disagrees about the point that we're talking about, which is, in other words, according to you who thinks that you have to do it as a unit, so then I'll tell you what the definition of time would be, which is the time it would have taken for you to finish. That would mean you'd have to go back to the beginning. But I don't even agree with you about that. And possibly I don't even agree with you that you needed to stop. In which case we could keep Rabbi Yochanan's statement without a problem. Tanu Rabbanit, new Braita. Tkiyot ein ma'akvot zo etzo. Brachot ein ma'akvot zo etzo. Tkiyot u'brachot shel Rosh Hashanah v'shel Yom Kippurim ma'akvot. Okay, I wanted to read the last line because it's clear then that the tkiyot and the blessings that we're talking about in the beginning are not of Rosh Hashanah. Yom Kippur here, we mean the Yom Kippur of the Yovel year, of the Jubilee year. So we're now comparing, and what are we comparing? Tkiyot and brachot of fast days, which is our great lead into the next Masechet. We already, from the middle of Masechet, had a lead into Ta'aniyot, where we were comparing the shofar to the Chatzotzrot and all the different things. Right? What is it gold or silver, and all the differences between the fast days and Rosh Hashanah. Here also we're comparing, right? I think that there's a lot of comparisons we're going to see as we learn Masechet Ta'anit, right? You would think that Ta'anit and Rosh Hashanah are very different, right? You would connect maybe more Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur together and put in a category. You would never really think to compare Ta'aniyot. But clearly, and maybe that's why Rosh Hashanah is a little bit out of order in the order of the Gemara, and it appears right before Ta'anit, because there's many comparisons between Rosh Hashanah and Ta'anit. So here's one. They both have shofar blasts, and they both have extra blessings that you insert into the prayer. Okay, there it's 6 blessings. By us, it's 3. There it's 6. Okay, we're going to have that in, we'll get to which fast you add them in, and we're talking about fast when there's no rain. Okay, not a regular fast day. Okay, that's why we don't know from these 24 blessings. We don't really do this anymore. So now, on the fast days, if you don't do all the tkiyot, it's fine. You did whatever you did. You don't have to do them all. They're not viewed as a set. Brachot em akvot zotzot. Same thing. If you added some of the blessings and not all the blessings in the Shemona Esrei, it would be fine. But tkiyot, brachot shel Rosh Hashanah v'shel Yom Kippurim ma'akvot. Now, there's 2 ways to read this. Either it means you have to do the blasts together with the blessings, or maybe not even together, but as a unit, you need to have shofar blasts and you need to have blessings. And if you miss one of them, you don't fulfill anything. Or maybe it means that the tkiyot as a unit are ma'akev one or the other, right? Meaning if you didn't do all the tkiyot, then you'd have a problem. And the brachot also, let's say you did machuyot and zichronot, but didn't say shofarot, you wouldn't even fulfill your obligation of saying machuyot and zichronot because they're all a unit. Okay, so again, 2 ways of viewing it: is the whole thing one unit, or is each one an independent unit that you have to have the unit, otherwise it doesn't work. My time, what's the reason? Amaraba, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, Imru lefanai beRosh Hashanah malchuyot zichronot v'shofarot. Obviously, God didn't say this, but it's as if God says to us, say malchuyot zichronot and shofarot in front of me. Malchuyot kadesh tamlichuni alechem. First, you have to make me king, right? This is a unit. You can't just do one without the other because they work together. First, you have to say, I want you to be my king. Zichronot, kadesh yavo lefanai zichronotchem letova. Then you have to say, well, remember us in a good way. Now that you're our king, so we're going to you to ask for you to remember us in a good way. Ubameh, and how do we do this? Bishofar. So that makes them all one unit, and possibly also the shofar goes, it's inherently a part of it, right? But shofar means 2 things. Number 1, with the bracha of shofarot is representing the shofar. But also maybe this is saying that's why you need the brachas to go with the shofar, because the whole way you do this, it's almost like you're doing a whole activity here. You're blowing the shofar in order to make God king, in order to remind God to remember us. Okay, and this is all viewed as one unit. What if you made the bracha, but you didn't have a shofar at the time, and then after you got a shofar, then you could blow the shofar after. This, by the way, would have then mean that if you do think it's ma'akvot so it doesn't necessarily mean they have to be at the same time, because as long as you've done it in the course of the day, it works, not necessarily with each other. So now they derive from this Mishnah. Tama de lo havale shofar mi'ikacha. Sounds like only if you didn't have a shofar before. But ha havale shofar mi'ikacha ki shama lehu aseder brachot shama lehu. Sounds like if you did have a shofar before, you would clearly put them with the blessings. And that's what we get, that they go with the blessings of the Amidah. Again, with a bit of a debate about whether it's in the silent Shemona Esrei or, right, it's not clear here, or only when the Shliach Tzibur says it. Now we're going to have a story. Rav Papa Bar Shmuel kam litzaluye. He got up to daven. Amar leshame says to his attendant, "Can you hear alach tkali? When I signal you in my silent Shemona Esrei, blow the shofar for me," which sounds like you do it in the silent prayer. Amar le Rava lo amru ela b'chever ear. What are you doing? You only need to do this in the community when you're having a communal prayer. You're davening by yourself. You don't do it by yourself. Okay, the tkiyot don't go with the bracha when you're an individual. Okay, we're going to talk at the Shiur more about this individual versus community. We're going to talk about that concept. Amar le Rava. Tanya Namihachi, Brighta to support this. Keshu shoman shoman ala seder val seder brachot. When he hears the shofar blast, he hears them in their shofar blast order and in the order of the blessings. But when is this? Bechever ear, only if you're in a communal prayer. Aval shelo bechever ear shoman ala seder. But when you're not in a communal prayer, then you hear the shofar blast according to their order. But shelo al seder brachot. But you don't do it with the blessings. The yachid shelo taka, this Braita just continues with some other things. If you didn't do your own tkiyah, chavero tokealo, even if the friend already fulfilled their obligation, they can do it for you. We talked about this before. The yachid shelo berech, ein chavero mevarech alav. But if you didn't make a bracha, your friend can't do the bracha for you. We're not talking about the bracha of shofar. We're talking about davening. It's just like, right, I wake up in the morning and I ask my friend, can you daven for me? Right? You can't do that. It's like you can't go to the bathroom for someone else. You can't pray for somebody else. Although we're going to see maybe in a certain way you can, we're going to finish up with that issue. If you have a hierarchy, better to blow than to make the brachot. Ketzav, what would be a situation? There's two cities. If in one place they have a shofar, but they don't have a Baal Tefillah who can daven. In the other place, they have someone who davens, but they don't have a shofar blower. Go to the place with the shofar blower. So the Gemara says, Pshita, that's obvious. Hadoraita ad Rabbanan. One is rabbinic and one is Torah law. Torah law, you have to blow the shofar. Brachot are only midrabanan. Let's say you're not sure you're going to make it in time for the shofar. You still go there even though you're not sure you might make it, whereas you know you'll make it to the brachot. Okay, this is a very interesting machloket about how the shliach tzibor can daven for the community. The Tanna Kama says no, every individual has to daven. Rabban Gamliel, and this is why I said I'm going to come back to maybe someone could pray for you. He says the shliach tzibor, the chazan, can pray for the people. Very interesting machloket, and it seems to be not just Rosh Hashanah related, but generally related. Tomorrow at the Bezrat Hashem at the Siyum on Sunday, we'll talk about why the Masechet ends with this. Tanya. So they say to Rabban Gamliel, so then why does the tzibor daven if they don't need to? To give him time to set up his prayers, to organize himself. Why he didn't do it at home is a good question, but they give him time. They said to Rabban Gamliel, according to you, why do you need shliach tzibor if everybody davens on their own? Well, there are people who don't know how to daven, so for them, he can fulfill their obligation. Amar lahem, so he says to them, if that's the case, if you think that it works, what's the difference if they know or they don't know? If it works to be, one person could write the chazan, can be the representative for all the people, then should also be able to fulfill it for anybody. So Amar Rabba Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, we're going to start this topic today and finish it at the Siyum. He says, Modim Chachamim LeRabban Gamliel. In the end, the rabbis agree with Rabban Gamliel that really, like he had a good argument there, really the Chazan can be motzi everybody. The Rav Amar Adayin Hi Machloket. Rav says, no way, they still argue with him. Shama Rabbi Chia Berei de Rabba Bar Nachmani, Azal Amar L'Shame Kamei de Rabbi Dimi Bar Chinana, the Shmata. He said this following thing in front of Rav Dimi. Amar lei hachi amarav adayin machloket. And he brought what Rabbi Yochanan said, and Rav Dimi said to him, no. Rav says it's still a machloket. Amar lei Rabba Bar Chana nami hachi kamar. They said Rabba Bar Chana also says it's adayin hi machloket. Ki amar Rabbi Yochanan lahashmata if legalei Rish Lakish v'amar adayin hi machloket. And it's Rabba Bar Chana. You missed the rest of his statement. He said Rabbi Yochanan things that they agreed with him. But Rish Lakish disagreed and said adayin hi machloket. So it's not just Rav, it's also Rish Lakish who disagrees. We'll end with a question. Umi Amar Rabbi Yochanan Hachi, did Rabbi Yochanan really say that the rabbis agreed with Rabban Gamliel that the shliach tzibor could fulfill the obligation for other people? Amar Rabbi Chana Tzipora Amar Rabbi Yochanan Hilchata Rabban Gamliel. He said, Rabbi Chana from Tzipori said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, halachas like Rabban Gamliel. When you say the halachas like Rabban Gamliel, what does that mean? Halacha michal de plige. You only say that if they disagree. So it seems like even Rabbi Yochanan thinks they disagree. We have a lot of questions today on what Rabbi Yochanan holds. Does he really hold this? What about that? Anyway, we're going to end with that question, and we will finish it up tomorrow on Sunday at the Siyum. Have a great Shabbat, everyone.